Thank you for tuning in to the Orange Peel Podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Welcome back to the Orange Peel Podcast. We are going to transition a little bit into a topic that's related to the daddy letters, but it's not about one specific letter. As we've been talking through these videos, I think it's natural for us to reflect on some of our own relationships and some of the challenges that we've gone through. And so we want to take some time and talk about some of the emotional hurt that we've experienced, maybe at the hands of men in our past relationships. What are some of the things, I guess, that you think have been the most hurtful, and how have you walked through those moments?
Who wants to go? I don't want to start. I'm not starting.
Or maybe let's start with a different kind of question, because this is something that I think we talk about a lot with one another, right? Like when we're all together and girl talk, we talk a lot about what we go through in relationships. What do we think it would be good for men to know about some of the things that they put us through, intentionally or unintentionally?
I think sometimes they lack emotional intelligence and empathy. And so these things impact obviously their actions, right? And so I just think cultural and societal norms sometimes can really contribute to that, or they just weren't taught. We're having this discussion, right, about these daughters and the different things that they've gone through. And so I think, sometimes we just don't learn these things until we experience it, or it's trial and error. So I think, those are some of the bigger, like the underlying, concept, I think, or the underlying, tone that I think comes out, like when dealing with, men sometimes in communicating and just how they care for our feelings.
Yeah, maybe sometimes there's not as much consideration for our feelings. I don't always think that the hurt that we experience is intentional,
Right.
but when there's not a pattern or habit of intentionally considering the other person, I think naturally you're going to end up hurting them.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's important for men, whether the hurt they cause is intentional or unintentional. I always try to say, whatever you're about to say or do to a woman, would you be okay with another man saying this to your mom or your sister or your niece or aunt, whatever? I think a lot of times they don't realize the long-lasting impact their hurts can have on us. I think sometimes, I'm not saying that men don't have emotions, that they don't get their feelings hurt, but I think that sometimes the way or the length or the extreme they go to hurt women can just be a bit extreme. And I think the way that women hurt men unintentionally or intentionally is just not comparable to the level or extent that men hurt women.
When we experience hurt in relationships, and I know that we're talking specifically about hurt that we feel from men, but I don't know that this is really a specifically gendered conversation, because we hurt one another in relationships. Do we think that the majority of the hurt that we either cause or experience is intentional or unintentional? Where do we think the majority is?
I would say unintentional. I don't think that people are intentionally going out with the thought process like, I'm going to hurt so and so. I think that it's just, in any relationship, there are two people coming from two totally different backgrounds and engaging and rubbing against one another. And so naturally, you guys are going to see things differently. And I think communication is really important and should take the forefront of any relationship, because that's what's going to help you kind of feel a little bit better and understand one another while this rubbing against one another is occurring, because it is going to happen. The question is to what extent, and then what extent will you be able to have a relationship based on that?
Yeah.
And we bring a lot of personal insecurities into relationships as well, right? And so sometimes that can create walls, and we put our guards up so much so that, we're not able to be vulnerable. And so how can you grow a relationship if you're not vulnerable? You have to have to some capacity, you have to be vulnerable. And we get very defensive about things, so then it becomes difficult to communicate that hurt or, what we're experiencing in that relationship, to one another.
But then on the other side of that, I feel like sometimes when you do reach that level, when you are vulnerable with that person, you have this level of securement and comfort with this person, and then something happens, and then let's say they use things that you confided in them with, and then now they're throwing it back in your face. So now it kind of pulls you back into this hole where it's like, okay, well, I finally did allow myself to be vulnerable with this person, and look what happened. So then you run into this cycle where it's like, okay, I had my guard up, I let it down, and now the person that allowed me or made me feel like it was okay to let it down hurt me, so now it's all the way back up. So now, you know what I mean? It's just like this constant cycle of basically emotional abuse, and it's like, how do you escape it,
Yeah. I think finding like comfort in God's word, and then not to of course pray away anything, but just to say finding comfort in God's word really does help with some of those kind of feelings that you have. I know I was going through what I feel to be a pretty complicated situation with family stuff, and I just kept praying to God. I was like, God, please don't harden my heart. Please don't harden my heart, because I know everything that I do flows from it. I love the sensitive person that I am. I love being able to love freely. I love being able to give freely. It makes me happy, genuinely. And so to take that piece away from me would have been too much for me, too much for my heart to bear. So I just, even though, of course, like I said, prayer, of course, it's a very good mechanism, but there's also a lot of heavy lifting that you have to do. And like I said before, seeking therapy or counseling. But just sometimes maybe we don't need to put those guards up the way that we feel like we need to. So kind of managing the guard in the first place is important, being proactive almost.
In one of the earlier Daddy letters talked about the differences, the biological differences between men and women. And one of those differences is that we are naturally more emotional. Do you think that makes us more prone to being hurt in relationships?
To some extent, I think so.
How so?
I feel like there's something that Brother Turner says. He says that you can't be hurt by something that you don't value, or you can't be hurt by somebody's opinion that you don't value. And I think to some extent that's true. So I mean, I think with the sensitivities that are kind of innate in our genetic makeup, with that lumped on top of it, I think that it causes more pain, more anguish than what men face, I guess. And then I think to a certain extent too, because of the genetic differences, we're looking for a certain response. We're hoping that whatever we're going through will elicit the same response in the other person. And so I think that is a part of the hurt too that we're feeling. You're looking for some kind of empathy from this person that you're just not going to get because that's not their makeup.
There's something that Lanicia always says to me, and it's don't expect you and other people. And I feel like that's something that I've struggled with, continue to struggle with, because like you said, when you're a very sensitive, a very emotional person, and you expect that in your partner or your friends or family, and it's when you don't get that, it's just it's almost like it's the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's very hard to swallow.
Yeah.
To swallow that.
Yeah. When we do experience hurt in relationships, well, I have a few different thoughts running through my mind. One of them is that I think, based on my own personal experience and some of the things that I'm hearing here today and that I've heard elsewhere, is that when we are hurt in relationships, oftentimes what it boils down to is the trust being broken. And it's when we no longer feel safe with someone is when we feel the most hurt by them. How have you all experienced emotional safety in relationships? And if you're open to sharing, how have you experienced that emotional safety being broken?
I can say I can say the emotional safety being built for me is being in a relationship where somebody understands like my love languages, understanding like how I need to be communicated to, as opposed to maybe someone else, or spending time with me and like taking the time to show care. And so I think that kind of like builds up my sense of safety. And so, and then kind of talking about almost like what we discussed with the daddy letters, being able to have like that sense of like leadership, like knowing that at the end of the day, you'll be able to handle things. I can pass like my burdens, not to say that you should solely bear them, because, you know, Mental Health Awareness Month for men.
Amen.
But that, you know, he's able to help kind of like bear the load. And so that's helpful. And then, the safety being broken, I don't know. I guess for me, experiencing the safety being broken is not following up like on what you said you would do, like saying that you would do something and just not doing it at all, or lying about doing it, which is kind of like leads into kind of like that gaslighting kind of conversation. But yeah, so yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's been when I'm able to really be vulnerable and feel free, you know, within that relationship to be vulnerable, right? And I think a lot of that is communication. When we can discuss anything, you know, and even the hard topics, and when the response from that man is, when he is okay and willing to engage in the hard topics and not run from the hard topics, the things that are difficult, whether it's, you know, about our relationship or about him, you know, and even me, and he's lovingly, he can and he will communicate things that can help me to be better, to be a better version of myself. And he's okay with receiving things that may be difficult to hear, but can also help him to be a better version of himself. That makes me feel safe. Because when you have been in a relationship, you know, in any way, whether it's a romantic relationship or friendship or kinship, and you have experienced, not being safe and not feeling secure, then you know what that when you see it, and then you also know what it is to feel safe, right? Like you begin to recognize, okay, this is different, right? And so, and it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel, you don't feel bad. You don't feel, embarrassed for saying what you need to say, or, sharing different things. And I think that when you can align like that in your communication and really understand for yourself, like, okay, this is what I want to communicate, and clarify, a lot of clarification as well with your partner. I think that that's very helpful and can really, help to bring about, that safeness or that safe space for you. So I think it's, that's something when we can talk about hard topics, and at the end of the conversation we can be okay.
Right.
That's a big thing for me. And then conversely, when we don't ever want to talk about the things that are difficult but are important and can make or break what we're going through, that's a red flag for me. And so when, like Allie mentioned, when you don't follow through, so when your behavior doesn't align with what you say, because we say a lot of things, you know what I mean? But what do we do? And so I think that that's also a red flag for me, and paying attention to those patterns can help you to identify things, that maybe, you have to make some hard decisions about.
Yeah.
So speaking from experience, there was a relationship in the past where I did find myself in a situation where I felt like the person made me feel 100% vulnerable, made me feel like we had this super secure, super comforting relationship where you can come to me about anything, good, bad, hard, sad, whatever. I'm going to be here for you. So then, I'm going to, believe it. So here I am, telling you all these like super deep, dark things that have occurred or are occurring in my life. And then when bad times, now we're like arguing or having hard times, now you're throwing those things in my face. It's like, oh, you are a bad person. Like, that was very, very, very hard to kind of like have happen type of thing.
Yeah, for your safe person to turn on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be really traumatizing.
Crazy. It's wild. Like, what? And then it's like, you would never do that to that person because, same thing. And the roles were reversed. Like, I created that safe space for this individual as well. And yes, there were times where he would make me upset, but I would like never dare, throw those same things that he confided me in back in your face. So it's just like, yeah, you need therapy. Like, what? I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when I think about the things that maybe made me feel unsafe emotionally. And then I think about maybe conversations that I have had with men and the things that like they need in relationships. Some of it is very different. So I think about when someone is like dishonest from omission, like just not sharing something. And a lot of times it has to do with not sharing like what they're thinking or how they're feeling like about what we're doing.
Yeah.
So whenever I feel like I'm in it alone, that makes me feel incredibly unsafe.
Yeah.
Also, when there's some sort of like ambiguity, right? Nowadays, the dating terms are a little bit different. They're not as black and white.
Right.
And there are a lot of different ways that we engage in romantic interactions and romantic connections. And it can be a really unsettling place to be to not really know if someone is being intentional or as intentional as you are. We all talk a lot about reciprocation in relationships and wanting things to be reciprocal, to be reciprocated.
Yeah.
And I think unintentionally sometimes there are mixed messages that are given. And then there just have been times where I feel like I'm having to decode when I wouldn't have to decode if we could just kind of share about it together. And so I guess that would fall into the category of communication, but I don't know if we always think about that as something that could make us feel unsafe. I think generally speaking, we all want to avoid any kind of rejection or abandonment. And these things that really ought to be done in collaboration actually make us feel rejected and abandoned.
Yeah.
And that's been some of the biggest emotional hurt that I've experienced and has led to unnecessarily, I think, relationships just completely ending. And then that's a whole different kind of hurt. And so earlier I said, a lot of times our hurt comes from a place of trust or trust being broken. And what I've heard is that on the other side, that men really experience a lot of hurt when it comes to, maybe feeling like disrespected. And there's a lot of ego, I think, that comes into play. And sometimes I think that some people are like protective of their own selves and their own ego, which I can understand to a certain extent. But when we're in the context of a relationship, it's important that we're open about those things that we're dealing with that are going to impact what it is that we're doing together. So whenever I end up feeling like I'm on an island by myself, that's been really hurtful for me in the past as well.
Yeah. I'll keep it brief, but something I just wanted to say about the communication topic that you had brought up by saying you feel like alone because there's so many things like almost of omission that you're not getting. I was explaining this to someone the other day. When we're not communicating and there's like this blank space, there's so much room for our minds to tell us all kinds of stories.
Yeah.
All kinds of stories my mind will make up, your mind will make up. And so to mitigate that, though, all we need to do is communicate things that we are feeling. And I feel like it's such a difficult ask sometimes. But I think like working on those communication skills is so important because otherwise, like you do kind of spiral. You do because you're feeling alone and you can tell yourself all kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah, true. I know that we are kind of running out of time here and we are really just barely scratching the tip of the iceberg here with this conversation. But I do at least hope that it has given folks some things to think about when it comes to the way that we navigate relationships and how we can do that in a safe way that's going to honor everyone's emotional safety. So we are going to wrap up this episode of the Orange Peel Podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us, and make sure that you come back again.
I can talk. I think that we are entering into an era of church, especially with my generation, where these conversations are being had and are being invited into the church space. And I just think that if we have more open and honest conversations in the church and truly prepare, going back to that purity conversation, truly prepare young women and young men for what temptation looks like, and from a place of vulnerability and also support, I think that you'll find that girls will be more prepared to enter into dating with not just a list of what not to do, but also what it looks like when temptation happens, how to combat it, what the relationship with God should look like. Because I think when we put so much emphasis on purity culture and also being a perfect wife, what else is my value outside of being a wife? What else does my value look like outside of being pure? Who am I outside of that? And I think that if we have those candid conversations that are also not just putting women at the seat and at the center of responsibility and accountability, in these purity topics, I think that we'll see that not only are we more open with having these conversations with our church leaders and with our parents and whomever else, but women will start to feel more prepared to enter into dating and pay a lot more attention to not just, oh, let me not have sex, but what are my boundaries? What should they look like? If I make a mistake, how to navigate that going forward without feeling like I'm the worst person in the world or that I lack value because I made this mistake.
Thank you for watching the Orange Peel podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for the next episode.